Finally, we have our stage 4 countries, in which we have continued extensions of lifespans, people living longer. Infectious diseases are very rare. You might see, for example, on IUPUI's campus, they've had mumps, they've had tuberculosis recently. Those are infectious diseases, but for the most part, non-infectious diseases explain stage 4 countries as far as how people die. And so we look at transitions happening. Some would say China is transitioning to stage 4. So one of the things they're seeing now in China is something we have in the United States, increasing obesity. So a lot of that's related to our diets that have higher levels of fat, also decreasing physical activity. Combine those two things together, of course, we're going to have increasing obesity rates. And this is at all age groups. So especially childhood obesity is becoming a bigger global issue, especially as more countries transition through this model. So we look at diabetes, for example, would be also something that you're seeing on the rise because more countries are transitioning through this particular model and then subsequently having higher levels of obesity, also not eating as good of diets, but a lot of that's related to advancements in technology. I mean, it's easier to get that crappy, bad-for-you food from anywhere in the world to you here in middle of nowhere, Indiana. Now let's see some evidence of this transition model. So we have our case study countries in the DTM stages. We've already identified them from a previous chapter. And when we look at communicable deaths, definitely we see that pattern. More people die per 100,000 persons. More people die in stage 2 and stage 3 countries from communicable or infectious diseases, which we can also then see on a map. And so a lot of those case study countries, those regions in which we see continued evidence of stage 2, stage 3 characteristics, we can see also have higher rates in this case of TB deaths, tuberculosis deaths from people who have HIV. So infectious diseases, we can see, once again, some regional, some very geographic patterns. More evidence, cholera. Recent outbreaks from 2010 to 2013. The areas colored there in orange are where we see these particular patterns in higher levels, and once again, also tend to be a lot of our stage 2 countries of the world. Now we have another pattern, and that's the fact that, man, these people in these stage 2, stage 3 countries, they also have higher levels of non-communicable deaths. So they just have more deaths in general. Now, there's some things going on there, but what we really want to focus in on is down at the bottom, looking at those stage 4 countries. Here you can see a proportion of the overall ways in which people die much higher there in terms of non-communicable or non-infectious diseases. And so we really need to think about these numbers in proportion to each other, which I do now in this far right-hand column. So this says this the proportion of non-communicable versus communicable deaths. And so you can see a much higher percentage in stage 4 countries of non-communicable deaths than those stage 2, stage 3 countries. So I just used the colors to further emphasize that. So once again, this shows evidence of the epidemiological transition model. Simple bar graph showing in 2010 the 10 leading causes of death in the United States. And we can see from this list, most of the ones there at the top, the biggest ones, the biggest bars, are non-communicable diseases. Now, interestingly, in a lot of wealthier countries, richer countries of the world, you do see lower rates of people smoking, or shall I say, decreasing rates of smoking. So essentially, people are smoking less. You're really seeing this in the United States from the younger population, young college students, 18 to, let's say, 35-year-olds, much lower rates of cigarette smoking. And so what that means is, though, those who have been smoking for the last 30, 40 years in the United States, that's since the 1950s, large numbers of people were smoking. Lung cancer has now become the top killer for women in, to say in general, in stage 4 countries. And so what's happening now, once again, like I said, the transition. So a lot of countries in the world that are transitioning through their model, now you're seeing increasing rates of tobacco usage, which makes the tobacco companies really, really happy. While tobacco might be decreasing in the United States, they're finding new markets, and they're finding new markets in a lot of those developing countries, those stage 3 countries. And so what's seeing now is more rates of lung cancers in a lot of places that previously didn't have those high rates, where people died more, once again, more from infectious diseases. And of course, this can be mapped. And so you see Southeast Asia, China, Uh, Great examples. Parts of Latin America, places that have really high percentage of tobacco use amongst adults, even though they're not what we would think of as stage 4 countries. Definitely stage 3 countries, though. China for sure, Indonesia for sure, Argentina, Chile, yada, yada. So what we can see here, though, is in Europe, especially there in Eastern Europe, very high percentage of tobacco use among adults. So subsequently, high rates of lung cancer in those areas. Go figure. Guess what you also find in those areas? Higher rates of alcohol use, and then subsequently liver failure and cirrhosis of the liver and all kinds of things related to alcoholism. So we can see some patterns. So finally we could say, wow, Africa and Middle East and parts of Asia finally have something good to talk about. The fact that you don't see high cigarette usage, high alcohol usage at the moment. So that's, once again, as places transition. Will their behavior transition? So far, it's been fairly predictable. Once again, you transition, you get a little bit extra wealth, you start buying, these vices, alcohol, cigarettes, tobacco, what have you. So this is, once again, we can relate this map, we can see it right now, 2012, but we can understand changes over time, transitions over time and place. And then continuing this cancer mortality, once again, same overlapping patterns. So if we could identify on a map, these are once again going to be more of our stage 4, late stage 3 countries. Fittingly, I'm going to end this discussion here on epidemiologic transition model, this video, by talking about the end of life. So this life expectancy. And so here's different data, this interesting patterns that are revealed. First off, we can see our lower income countries, our stage 2 countries. One of the things is there have been major improvements in life expectancy. Now, some would say that it's because they have so much improvement potential in terms of life expectancies were so low they could only go high. But what's really happening there, once again, is the transition. You're seeing evidence of this transition. So as you increase wealth, there's improvements in life expectancy. Medical awareness, technology is advancing, science is advancing. However, its impact as far as increasing life expectancy isn't as profound there as you would find in stage 2 countries. Finally, when we look at gender, some interesting patterns are also revealed. We look at stage 2 countries on the left, we also refer to them as lower income countries, and high income countries on the right, we also refer to those as stage 4 countries. And so what this shows is the difference between the average life expectancy of a woman versus a man is not that different at all in stage 2 countries, but pretty noticeable difference in stage 4 countries. Now, the moral of the story is all throughout the world, women outlive men. So that's definitely something we see. But the idea here is as countries and regions transition over time, as they become more like high-income countries, women increasingly outlive men. And so what this shows is in high-income countries in 2012, women were outliving men by 6.2 years, whereas in low-income countries it was only 2.9 years. And so what that means is essentially, as you transition, women increasingly outlive their male counterparts.